You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Express's political editor, Sam Lister, and the new Statesman's associate political editor, Rachel Cunliffe. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. End of an era is the leading line on the Financial Times as the chair of Fox and News Corp, Rupert Murdoch, steps down, handing his media empire to his son. The headline for the Daily Mail, Starmer lets cat out of bag on Brexit betrayal. The Eye is reporting on claims from economists that interest rates have hit a peak. The Guardian headline reads campaigners plan legal challenges to Sunak's U-turn on green policies. The Telegraph is reporting on the Chancellor's claims that tax cuts are virtually impossible. While the Express is claiming the Chancellor says tide is turning on cost of living crisis. The Sun is reporting on following the Russell Brand saga. For your eyes only, reads the Mirror as it reports on the beautician up on spy charges. The Metro's front page is on the UK making medical history with a drug-free transplant revolution. Save Our Spam, the Star featuring its campaign to get Brits buying the processed meat again. Why? A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Sam Lister and Rachel Cunliffe. Don't worry, I won't get you to comment on that story. We are going to start with the Telegraph, however, to more serious matters. And the Chancellor is saying that the priority of halving inflation means that he's got little room for giveaways in the form of tax cuts. Sam?
Yeah, I think this will be disappointing to many of his backbenchers. They are desperate to have tax cuts and they want them announced sooner rather than later. But I think the Chancellor is obviously just playing a very cautious game here. The economy is still very volatile. We've seen from the Bank of England today that interest rates have been held, but it was a very, very close decision. The Monetary Policy Committee was split 5-4, so it could have easily gone the other way. And there are still 2 more decisions for that committee to take by the end of the year. So, you know, there's still a long way to go on these things, but the Chancellor's point is we're on the right track. If we stick to the plan, then we can bring down debt and get the economy back on track in the long term, but we don't want to mess it up now.
And Rachel, really, I suppose the Chancellor setting expectations.
Yes, trying very hard to manage expectations, but also to leave himself a little bit of wiggle room so that it's possible to announce tax cuts in the budget in the spring, just before an election. Not quite sure when the election is going to be, but to kind of save it for then when it will have the most political impact. The voices in the Conservative Party clamouring for tax cuts are growing louder, especially because it turns out that government borrowing has been lower than forecast, and you've got a lot of Conservatives going, look, you said borrowing was going to be X amount, it's less than that, why can't you use that money on tax cuts? But the Chancellor's point is that government borrowing, the interest rates on government borrowing are still higher than expected. They're anticipated to stay higher for longer, and that means getting down inflation is sort of the core priority. Although I think even if they do manage to hit that target, to halve it from over 10% to 5.3%, which is what Rishi Sunak's target is by the end of the year, they're still going to have a political challenge on their hands, I think, because a lot of people in this country assume that falling inflation means falling prices. It doesn't. It means things are going to continue getting expensive, just at a slightly slower rate. People are still going to be feeling the pressure, feeling poorer. So while inflation is a really important thing to bring down in sort of the wider economic context, I don't think it will help the individual budgets of voters quite the same way as, say, tax cuts would. And that...
Looking at the actual interest rate decision, in terms of we've had 14 consecutive rises. Is this the beginning of the easing?
I mean, that is clearly what everybody hopes. This has been the first time that we've not had an interest rate rise since November 2021. I mean, that's quite an astonishing thing, really, isn't it? The best part of 2 years, we've had 14 of these rises. So clearly, this is a kind of great boost to to people who hold mortgages today, because they potentially faced another few £100s on their bills if they were renegotiating or on trackers. But obviously, you know, there is still a long way to go. I think the wider picture here is one of caution from Jeremy Hunt. Number 10 are very, very confident, though, or very quietly confident that they will meet the inflation target of around 5% by the end of the year. They are feeling quite confident that they're on course to meet that. But obviously, they're also very jittery about doing anything to throw them off course.
But the lowering the rate of inflation has really sent out positive vibes. The economists hadn't expected it.
Yes.
So it's a pleasant surprise, as it were.
Yeah, and it's also predicted to fall to about 3% next year, which obviously is more in line with what we are used to as a nation. We usually hover around 2%. So certainly things are going in the right direction. And there's also plenty of economists around today who are talking about the fact that actually interest rates could come down in the middle of next year. So again, that will be a great boost for anybody renegotiating their mortgage. And obviously getting into the point then when you are heading more closely to a general election, it could be next autumn. I mean, it could even be next summer, but, you know, around that time. And if people are starting to feel better off, then obviously this is what the government are clearly aiming for.
Politics.
Yes. Always.
Let's move to the other story on the front of the Financial Times, and describing it as the end of an era. Rupert Murdoch stepping back, not down, stepping back at the age of 92, Rachel.
When I saw this story, my first thought was, this isn't how Succession was meant to end. Obviously, that just tells you how much of a figure in media popular culture Murdoch was in his empire, that obviously that show was possibly based on him or a family like him. And
that is the suggestion.
That is the suggestion, which we can neither confirm nor deny. But there has been so much speculation over decades about this family-run business. He started it from an Australian newspaper and grew it into this multinational, multimedia conglomerate that had, I think, it made him the most powerful businessman in the world at various points. Maybe Elon Musk might challenge that now. But loads of speculation about who would he pass it on to? Would he pass it on to one of his children? Which one of his children? Would it be his eldest son? And we found out today that he is stepping back. He's going to be chair emeritus. Not quite sure what that means. So he's still going to be involved and a presence there, but not strictly running it. But he issued this letter announcing the plans to step back, in which he said, and I kind of want to read it in full. He talked about elites. He writes, elites have open contempt for those who are not members of their rarefied class. Most of the media is in cahoots with the elites, peddling political narratives rather than pursuing the truth. And you think, yes, that's true, but if you were to name a media elite who was quite cosy with the political classes in various countries, you would probably start by discussing Rupert Murdoch, would you not? So I thought that was an interesting detail.
Yes, a very interesting letter, wasn't it? I mean, many people, obviously, as you say, would describe him as being part of that elite.
Yeah, it's a very interesting discussion, that really, isn't it? Because he is somebody who created this empire out of virtually nothing, and you know, obviously he owned till quite recently The Sun, a paper that champions its working class readers, and I think, you know, he does have a role to play in going against the elites, regardless of his own personal wealth and the kind of lifestyle he lives. He still has that in him as a journalist. He still wants to champion the rights of those people, and I think that's quite interesting. I thought, actually, the Telegraph has a comment from Jeremy Hunt about it. And very diplomatically, he says he's had moments of feeling different emotions towards Mr. Murdoch, but described him as a formidable operator. I mean, that is a very carefully worded response to the announcement. I think on Rachel's point about the emeritus role, I think that just means he's got carte blanche to do whatever the hell he likes in terms of still interfering in the business. But for his son, Lachlan, you know, he's almost had a kind of Prince Charles-style apprenticeship. He's 52, his father's 92. He must have wondered, was he ever going to get to wear the crown? He's finally got to wear the crown. It will be interesting to see how much he diverges from his father in these kind of attitudes. But I think the reason he is the heir is because he's the most closely linked in mindset to Rupert Murdoch.
And in true Succession fashion, James Murdoch, the FT is reporting, is largely estranged from his older brother Lachlan and has spoken out against Fox News, while the loyalties of sisters Prudence and Elizabeth are uncertain. Just finally, Rachel, before we go to the break, what do you think the legacy of Rupert Murdoch will be, although he's still very much around?
Well, one legacy and one thing worth mentioning is that he's just settled for, I had to read this again, nearly $800 million to halt a trial over conspiracy theories essentially relating to voting machines and the US election. So I think for many, his legacy will be being one of the media figures who kind of allowed that to happen and that narrative to spread. But you can't deny his influence and what he's been able to do to grow a media empire like that and to switch so effectively between different mediums to see which way the wind is blowing, the move to streaming platforms, the move to sort of social media, how to adapt a newspaper and how to adapt TV news in that way, and incredibly impressive.
OK, Rachel and Sam, for the moment, thank you. We are going to take a break, but coming up, our own Sam Coates got the scoop earlier today. We'll discuss Sir Keir Starmer's candid comments about the UK's relationship with the EU when we come back. Do stay with us. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Sam Lister and Rachel Cunliffe. Let's take a look at the Mail front page. And they're accusing Sir Keir Starmer for letting the cat out of the bag on Brexit. Take us into this story, Sam.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. It is obviously a Sky News scoop, so followed up by the Mail. We've obviously followed it up as well inside our paper tomorrow. The Telegraph have it. And you've certainly seen quite a reaction from very senior Conservatives today. They've seen that this is an opportunity for them because Keir Starmer was at a conference, a centre-left conference in Canada, chatting in a very relaxed fashion, and he admits that Labour doesn't want to move away from alignment with the EU when it comes to standards on various things. So essentially, the critics from the Conservative Party say that would leave us a rule taker rather than a rule maker, because obviously now we're outside the bloc, we wouldn't have a say, we would just be taking rules from Brussels, which is obviously the worst of all worlds. And they feel that the whole point of Brexit is that actually you can be more dynamic, you can make regulations that suit the UK's needs rather than just taking direction from Brussels. Clearly, Keir Starmer has a very different point of view. He says that actually the problems come from tensions caused by trade frictions because of any difference in rules. So he wants to keep us very, very closely aligned. Now, Conservative and backbencher MPs say to me that actually you then are just in the orbit of the EU. And ultimately, the Labour Party will then say, look, we're taking all these rules from Brussels, we might as well just go back in. And that long-term, the plot is to drag the UK back into the EU.
Rachel, are you surprised that he said this? I mean, he must have known how this would be interpreted, least of all by the Conservatives and his critics.
I am surprised because Labour has been so careful over the last year not to make comments like this and not to say anything that could give critics of Starmer the chance to say, look, he just wants to take us back into the EU. I mean, I watched the full clip, and actually what he says is we don't necessarily want to diverge because we make our regulations around shared values, and if we have the same values as you on things like environmental protections or workers' protections, why would we diverge? And he goes, there's a lot more common ground than you think. So I think what he was trying to say, and certainly what the audience took from that, is that Britain doesn't have to take the EU rules, but actually if you are working towards a common goal, you might end up with regulations that look very similar because you both want the same thing, and then you would have far less friction to trade, and that would boost our economy and get rid of a lot of the red tape and the friction that we've seen as a result of Brexit. That's what he was trying to say, and I think that's a very reasonable point. But I do wonder if he forgot that there were cameras on him and it wasn't just the other centre-left leaders at this conference in Montreal who'd be watching, and that people back here might read it in a slightly different way.
But just very quickly, both of you, do you think this is Conservative spin with headlines like he's let the cat out of the bag? Or do you think that really what he was trying to say should be interpreted in the way that Rachel's saying?
I think he felt very comfortable sitting in a room with like-minded leaders far, far away from Westminster, which he said recently that he hates. He prefers being in Davos. He obviously prefers being in Canada. He can chat to like-minded people on the international stage. And I think he spoke freely, and I think he was speaking from, you know, the heart about what he feels about the EU. We know he wanted a second referendum. He's made no bones about the fact he was a Remainer. He has said that actually rejoining the EU, the single market, the customs union is a red line for Labour. That may be so at the next election, but if Labour do get into power, you know, they are putting us on a trajectory, really, by the looks of it, to rejoining some form.
Rachel, we've got about 30 seconds to talk about this medical breakthrough pictured on the front page of the Metro.
That's good, because I only have 30 seconds worth to say about it, except that I'm really, really excited. This is the first ever drug-free transplant, an 8-year-old girl, and it says that her immune system has been reprogrammed using stem cells from her mum, who also donated a kidney, and that means that her body now accepts the organ. She won't have to take immunosuppressants for the rest of her life. Pioneering medical breakthrough here, and has really, really exciting implications.
Yeah, indeed. Good news story. Sam and Rachel, thank you both.